The courtroom was full of quiet talking. Lawyers were whispering to each other and jurors were shifting in their seats. Reporters were everywhere, making it feel like a big movie scene. Every time someone moved, cameras flashed. But people weren't here just for the case. They were here for Keanu Reeves. Keanu Reeves, the famous action movie star, was standing in front of a judge. But this time he wasn't acting in a movie. He was defending himself in one of the biggest trials of the year. People were shocked that Keanu decided to be his own lawyer. The courtroom was filled with smart and experienced lawyers. Some had worked in law for many years. They thought it was crazy that an actor known for action movies would try to beat them in court. Even the news reporters, who usually liked celebrities, didn't believe Keanu could win. Keanu had never studied law. He didn't go to law school. But here he was, standing alone in the courtroom, looking calm and ready. The room was full of excitement because everyone knew this wouldn't be a normal trial. The judge, Warren Malcolm, had seen many people try to defend themselves before. But never had he seen someone as famous as Keanu Reeves do it. The judge looked up from his papers and stared at Keanu. Keanu stood tall, his face calm. His eyes were serious as he looked back at the judge. There was something strong about the way he stood, even though he wasn't doing anything dramatic. Judge Malcolm cleared his throat and smirked. "Mr. Reeves," he said in a sarcastic voice, "you're really going to defend yourself? You do understand this isn't a movie, right? This is real life. There are no second takes, no stunt doubles, no practice runs. You can't just walk in here and expect to win like in a Hollywood film." The courtroom became silent. The judge wanted to remind Keanu that this was serious business, not a fun scene from a movie. But Keanu didn't seem nervous at all. He looked straight at the judge and spoke calmly. "I'll manage, Your Honor," he said, his voice steady. A few people in the courtroom chuckled. Some of the lawyers exchanged amused looks. Others smirked. Everyone had the same thought. This was going to be a disaster. Keanu had no chance. The case was very serious. The charges were about money laundering, bribery, and fraud. If he lost, Keanu could go to jail for a long time. No one thought he could win. But there was something about the way Keanu stood that made people pause. They didn't want to admit it, but something about him made them unsure. Judge Malcolm, still amused, motioned for Keanu to sit down. "All right, Mr. Reeves," the judge said. "But let me warn you, I won't allow any drama or tricks. If you're doing this as a joke, you should get a real lawyer before it's too late." Keanu nodded and walked to his table. He sat down and placed a pile of legal documents in front of him. The sound of papers rustling made the quiet room even quieter. It was clear Keanu wasn't taking this lightly. The judge sighed and turned to the case. He didn't think Keanu would last long. The prosecution lawyer, Victoria Graves, stood up. She was sharp, smart, and confident. She had a team of experienced lawyers behind her, while Keanu had no one. Victoria wasted no time. "Your Honor," she said, speaking to the judge, "the evidence is clear. The witnesses are strong. Mr. Reeves has been accused of serious financial crimes. He tried to hide money and commit fraud. We will prove beyond a doubt that he is guilty." She glanced at Keanu with a small, smug smile. "But of course," she added, "he is free to waste his time trying to defend himself." The courtroom already seemed to believe Victoria. She was a skilled lawyer and Keanu was just an actor. He didn't belong here. But Keanu didn't react. He sat quietly, flipping through his documents. He didn't look scared or worried. He looked focused. His fingers tapped the table softly, as if he was thinking deeply about something. The judge noticed Keanu's calmness and raised an eyebrow. Most people in this situation would be shaking. But Keanu looked as if he had everything under control. The air in the room changed. People were still sure he would fail, but they couldn't ignore how steady he seemed. The judge leaned back, waiting to see the disaster unfold. He was ready to shut down any weak arguments Keanu tried to make. What no one knew, however, was that Keanu Reeves was not just pretending. He was about to surprise them all. As Victoria Graves finished her speech, a quiet murmur spread through the courtroom. She had spoken clearly and strongly, making the case seem obvious. She described Keanu as a man who had carefully planned his crimes. She said he had used tricks to hide illegal money. She made it sound like there was no way he could be innocent. Keanu, however, didn't move. His face was calm, his eyes locked onto Victoria. He showed no fear. The jury, confused by his lack of reaction, exchanged looks. They had never seen a celebrity defend themselves before, and certainly not someone like Keanu Reeves. Judge Malcolm, eager to see what would happen next, motioned for Keanu to speak. The room fell silent. Everyone turned their eyes to Keanu, the actor who had chosen to stand alone in court. Keanu slowly stood up. His movements were controlled. His black suit was perfectly fitted, making him look professional and serious. The tension in the room softened just a little. He walked to the center of the courtroom. The prosecution's case was already laid out in front of him like a puzzle. His expression remained unreadable, but his eyes were sharp. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Keanu began, his voice calm and smooth. "I am not here because I want attention. I am not here to put on a show. I am here because I believe in my innocence. I am here to prove the truth." His words were simple, but they carried weight. He wasn't trying to act or be charming. He was speaking straight from the heart. Judge Malcolm, who had expected Keanu to stumble, leaned back in his chair. He had thought Keanu would be either too emotional or completely clueless. But instead, standing before him was a man who looked fully in control. For the first time since the trial began, the judge felt something unexpected: curiosity. Maybe, just maybe, Keanu Reeves wasn't as lost as everyone thought. Keanu kept talking, his voice becoming stronger. "The charges against me are based on guesses, not facts. The proof that the other side is showing might look strong at first, but it has been taken out of context. I will show you how each claim has been twisted and how the truth has been changed." The room was very quiet. Everyone was staring at Keanu as he stepped into a serious situation. He didn't wave his arms or talk in a dramatic way. Instead, he spoke clearly, getting straight to the point. He reached for a stack of papers in front of him, flipping through them like someone who knew exactly what he was looking at. He wasn't stumbling over words and he wasn't wasting time. He was diving straight into the case. "Let me start with the first accusation," Keanu said, looking around the room but never staring at one person for too long. "Money laundering. The people accusing me say that I hid illegal money by moving it through different bank accounts. But if you look closely, you'll see that the transactions were all legal business deals. There is no real proof that I did anything wrong. In fact, the financial records actually prove that I didn't." The jury was paying attention now. Their faces changed from doubtful to curious. They had come into this trial thinking Keanu was guilty, but now they were hearing something different. Something they didn't expect. Judge Malcolm, who had been watching Keanu carefully, leaned forward in his seat. He put his hands together and said, "Mr. Reeves, are you saying that the people accusing you have just misunderstood the financial records?" Keanu nodded, not nervous at all. "Exactly, Your Honor. The records have been shown in the wrong way and I will prove that. I ask you to look at the timing of these transactions and who was involved. If you do, you'll see that the connections are not what they seem." A quiet murmur ran through the courtroom. The judge, looking surprised, sat back in his chair and studied Keanu like he was trying to solve a puzzle. Earlier, people thought Keanu was unprepared, but now they were starting to see him differently. Victoria Graves, the lawyer trying to prove Keanu was guilty, shifted in her seat. She had thought Keanu would fail. She assumed he didn't know anything about law and that she could beat him easily. But Keanu wasn't falling into her trap. Instead, he was carefully taking apart her case, one piece at a time. Victoria stood up, trying to take back control. "Your Honor," she said, sounding frustrated, "the defendant is not an expert in financial documents. He doesn't know accounting or law. His argument is just a distraction." Keanu didn't even blink. "With all due respect, Miss Graves, the facts speak for themselves," he answered calmly. "This isn't about being an expert. It's about using logic and finding the truth. I may not be a lawyer, but I know how to read a document and I know how to connect the dots." The courtroom was silent again. And for the first time, it was clear that Keanu wasn't just defending himself, he was actually winning people over. At first, the jury thought of him as just a famous actor playing a role. But now they saw a man fighting to clear his name and doing it surprisingly well. Keanu turned back to the papers, scanning for the next piece of evidence. He moved smoothly, like someone who had been preparing for this moment for a long time. The real battle had just begun, and Keanu had made his first move with perfect timing. Victoria Graves, now realizing she had misjudged him, glanced at her legal team. It was obvious now that this trial wasn't going to be the easy win she had expected. Keanu wasn't just another celebrity in trouble, he was a serious opponent who didn't play by the usual rules. The fight was far from over, and the courtroom had just become his stage. The courtroom buzzed with whispers. The energy in the room had completely changed in just a few hours. Earlier, people thought Keanu Reeves was clueless, but now they saw him as someone who could actually challenge the prosecution. His calm and clear way of breaking down the case was making the experienced lawyers nervous. Victoria Graves sat at her table, watching Keanu with narrowed eyes. She had expected an easy win. After all, Keanu was an actor, not a lawyer. How could he possibly compete with her? But within just a few hours, she realized Keanu was different. He wasn't just clever, he was breaking down her case piece by piece, showing all its weak spots. Judge Malcolm had been doubtful of Keanu at first. But now, as Keanu questioned an important witness, the judge's expression changed. He looked surprised, then thoughtful. It was clear to everyone, Keanu wasn't just pretending. He was playing the game on his own terms, and he was doing it better than anyone expected. Keanu stood in the center of the room, tall and calm. He had already made his opening arguments, but now he was getting into the details of the case. His voice was steady, no sign of fear. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, looking at everyone, first the judge, then the jury, then the audience. "The prosecution says that certain financial transactions prove I was doing something illegal. But the truth is more complicated than they have told you." He reached for more documents and pulled out printed records of his business transactions. As he flipped through them, the room went completely quiet, waiting for what he would say next. Victoria Graves jumped up. "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is trying to explain financial documents, but he isn't qualified. These papers are complicated and need experts to analyze them." Keanu responded immediately. "I'm not analyzing them, Miss Graves. I'm just showing you the exact transactions you are calling part of a money laundering scheme. But if you look closely, you'll see that they are normal business deals, nothing illegal at all." Judge Malcolm leaned forward, raising an eyebrow. "Sustained," he said. "Mr. Reeves may continue, but his argument must be based on facts." Victoria frowned but had no choice but to sit down. Keanu, completely calm, looked back at the documents. His next move would be important. "Look at the date on this transaction," Keanu said, pointing at a line of numbers. "The prosecution says this was the start of a big money laundering operation. But if you look at the deposit made by a legitimate business partner, you'll see the truth. This wasn't illegal money, it was a routine payment for services. The timing and details prove that." Keanu looked at the jury, his face serious. "I ask you to pay attention to the details. The truth is in the details." The jury leaned in, whispering to each other. They hadn't expected Keanu to explain things so clearly. In fact, they now seemed more willing to listen to him than to Victoria, who was looking more and more frustrated. Victoria tried to take control again. "Mr. Reeves, this isn't just about one transaction. It's about a pattern. We aren't looking at random payments. We're looking at a system of illegal financial activity." But Keanu was ready. "You're right, Miss Graves, it's not just about one transaction. That's why I showed you that every transaction you accused me of being part of was actually legal. In fact, the IRS checked my finances just 6 months ago and found no problems." The courtroom went silent. That statement was huge. If Keanu's finances had already been reviewed and approved, then the prosecution's entire case could be wrong. Victoria's mouth opened, but no words came out. She had been waiting for Keanu to make a mistake. Instead, he was proving her wrong, one fact at a time. Malcolm had been quiet this whole time, but now he looked at Victoria with a raised eyebrow. "Miss Graves, would you like to answer Mr. Reeves' question about the IRS audit?" he asked. Victoria looked around the courtroom, feeling nervous. Her confidence was slipping away. I'll need to check that information, Your Honor," she said, her voice shaking a little. She was usually strong, but now she was struggling. Keanu gave her a small, polite nod, as if to say he noticed her trying to stay strong. "Of course, Miss Graves," he said calmly. But inside, he knew this was an important moment. He had just started breaking apart the prosecution's case. Things were changing. Before, people thought he had no chance. But now, Keanu was showing he knew how to fight back. Victoria stepped back, clearly shaken. Keanu went back to his seat. He glanced at the jury. Before, they looked at him with doubt. But now they were interested. They wanted to know more. Judge Malcolm leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He locked eyes with Keanu for a second. Something had changed. At first, the judge thought Keanu wasn't serious. But now he was starting to wonder if there was more to Keanu Reeves than he thought. The battle had just begun, but at this moment, Keanu had shown that he was not weak. The prosecutor had a strong team, but Keanu had something special. He was smart and he refused to be scared. As the jury thought about what had just happened, it was clear that Keanu Reeves, the actor who was now defending himself in court, had just made a big move. The trial was now on its third day. The courtroom had started to feel different, like it was moving in an unusual rhythm. Before, the prosecution's case seemed strong, like a wall that couldn't be broken. But now that wall had cracks. Keanu, who had been seen as just a famous person trying to act like a lawyer, was now seen as something else. A real problem for the other side. He didn't have a defense team. Some people thought he was being arrogant by doing this alone. But the truth was, things were starting to go in his favor. The jury, who at first wasn't sure about him, was now paying attention to every word he said. There was something about the way he spoke. His voice was steady, his words were clear, and he never looked afraid. Keanu wasn't just trying to protect himself. He was showing the court how smart he was. But then, on the fourth day, something unexpected happened. Something that would change everything. Keanu was getting ready to show evidence that would prove the prosecution's top witness was lying. But before he could enter the courtroom, someone unexpected appeared. It was Daniel Mercer, a lawyer who was famous for working on big financial crime cases. He wasn't the kind of lawyer who liked the spotlight. He worked in the background planning strategies. In the world of legal battles, he was known as one of the best. And now he was standing in front of Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," Mercer said in a calm voice, "I've been watching you in court. You're good. Very good." Keanu was surprised. He raised an eyebrow. "I don't have time for small talk," he said. His voice was polite but firm. Mercer nodded. "I understand. But I'm not here for small talk. I think you need help." Keanu looked at him closely. Mercer wasn't just some random lawyer. He was someone who understood how this game was played. He could be very useful. But Keanu had been handling everything on his own, and he didn't want anyone to mess that up. "You came here without being invited," Keanu said carefully. "Why should I trust you?" Mercer gave a small smile, but his eyes stayed serious. "I'm not trying to take over your case, Mr. Reeves. But let's be honest, you're up against powerful people. Victoria Graves won't give up easily. And there's something you haven't seen yet. Something that could hurt your case." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Mercer took a deep breath. "I've been following the money. You're right, the prosecution's evidence isn't strong. But they have a witness. If you don't handle her correctly, she could destroy your case." Keanu felt a chill. He had a feeling something was wrong with the prosecution's main witness, but he couldn't figure out what. "Who is she?" Keanu asked, lowering his voice. "Her name is Samantha Rhodes," Mercer said. "She used to work for you. She left your company under strange circumstances. Victoria Graves is using that against you. But what you don't know is that Rhodes has a past. A bad one. And I can prove it." Keanu's mind started racing. Samantha Rhodes. He had worked with her before, but he hadn't thought much about her leaving. Now it made sense. The prosecution wanted to use her because she had inside knowledge. She knew things about his company and money. That made her the perfect witness for them. But if Mercer was right, "You want to help me expose her past?" Keanu asked, starting to see the plan in his head. "What? What's in it for you?" Mercer leaned in slightly. "You don't have to publicly destroy her. Just make the jury doubt her. If they don't trust her, the whole case falls apart." Keanu stayed silent for a moment, thinking. Mercer wasn't asking for money or favors. He just had a plan. And Keanu couldn't ignore it. He had made it this far alone, but now he had a chance to strike harder. "Fine," Keanu said, staying calm. "Help me take her down, and I'll make sure no one knows you were involved." Mercer held out his hand. Keanu shook it firmly. "Deal?" Mercer said. "Let's get to work." As the courtroom session started, Keanu walked back in with new confidence. He had a plan now. A real strategy. He had learned something important. Sometimes, even the strongest fighters need allies. And Mercer, mysterious as he was now part of Keanu's team. Samantha Rhodes was about to take the stand. Keanu was ready. Victoria Graves stood beside her witness, looking confident. She thought she was about to win. But when she looked at Keanu, something made her pause. He wasn't nervous. He was calm, focused. And for the first time, Victoria felt a tiny bit of doubt. The courtroom became silent as Samantha Rhodes sat down to testify. She looked professional and confident. She was the kind of witness juries trusted. Keanu began asking her questions. But he wasn't aggressive. He was careful, smart. He asked about why she left his company. About her money problems. About her history. The questions seemed simple, but each one was like a small needle poking at her story. Slowly, Rhodes started to look nervous. She messed up some of her answers. Her confidence started to crack. The jury noticed. The judge noticed. And Victoria Graves? She definitely noticed. Keanu wasn't just winning. He was showing everyone that he knew how to fight in a courtroom. The fourth day of the trial continued, and the courtroom was filled with tension. The jury, who once thought this would be an easy case, now saw something different. This wasn't just a trial. This was a battle of minds. And Keanu Reeves wasn't just some actor playing a role. He was a real threat. Victoria Graves still had more witnesses, but now the jury wasn't so sure about her case. Keanu was getting stronger, smarter. But he knew he needed one last thing. One final piece of proof that would win him the case for good. And just as he thought about his next move, Daniel Mercer entered the courtroom again, moving through the crowd like a shadow. Whatever was coming next, Keanu was ready. The day before, Keanu had a feeling that Mercer knew something important, but he wasn't sure what it was yet. When Mercer looked at him, Keanu gave him a small nod. This was a signal for Mercer to meet him in the hallway during a break in the trial. During the short break, Keanu walked out into the hallway. Mercer was already there waiting for him. He looked serious, almost worried. "I did some more digging into the case," Mercer said in a quiet voice. "There's something you need to see." Keanu leaned in, curious. "What did you find?" Mercer pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and handed it to Keanu. "This," Mercer said, "is a full copy of the financial records for the prosecution's witness, Samantha Rhodes. It turns out she was involved in some shady investments before she started working for you. These investments are linked to offshore accounts and companies that have connections to organized crime." Keanu's heart skipped a beat. "Are you saying that the prosecution's main witness has been involved in criminal activity?" "Not just involved," Mercer said, his voice tense. "She's been laundering money. And I have the proof. Wire transfers, documents, everything that shows her direct involvement in these companies. If we reveal this, her testimony will be completely useless." Keanu's mind was racing. He wasn't sure how deeply Rhodes was tied to crime, but now he had undeniable proof. This was exactly what he needed, the key to breaking the case wide open. "This changes everything," Keanu muttered, looking at the documents. "But how do we present it? We can't just throw it all out at once. If we do, it'll look like we're just attacking her." Mercer nodded. "Exactly. We have to be careful. First, we'll question her about her financial dealings and make her nervous. If she starts squirming, the jury will notice. Then once we get the jury to doubt her, we'll reveal the big evidence." Keanu flipped through the folder, thinking hard. If he played this right, this evidence could destroy the case against him. But if he made the wrong move, it could backfire. "I have to be careful," Keanu said thoughtfully. "I can't just go in and attack her, but this could be the leverage we need." Mercer nodded. "I'm with you, Keanu. But be ready. Once this comes out, there's no turning back. You'll be exposing everything, and Rhodes might get desperate. She could change her story or even fight back harder. But if our evidence is strong enough, and I believe it is, then this case will be over." As the trial started again, Keanu walked back to his seat at the defense table, his mind sharp and focused. He had the weapon he needed. Now it was just about waiting for the right moment. When Samantha Rhodes took the stand again, she looked different. She wasn't as confident as before. Now there was a nervousness about her. Keanu stood up to question her. The courtroom went silent. "Miss Rhodes," Keanu said in a calm, steady voice, "I'd like to go back to something you said earlier. You told us that your financial dealings before working for my company were completely honest. Is that correct?" Rhodes hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes, that's correct." Keanu stepped forward and pulled out some documents from the folder Mercer had given him. "But these documents," he said, holding them up for the jury to see, "tell a different story. These records show that you made several investments in offshore accounts. These accounts are linked to companies with ties to crime. Some of these companies are even under investigation for money laundering." Gasps filled the courtroom. Rhodes's face turned pale. For the first time, she looked truly scared. "Would you like to explain these transactions, Miss Rhodes?" Keanu asked, his voice firm but calm. Rhodes's mouth opened, but no words came out. She was caught. The woman the prosecution had relied on so much was now exposed as someone involved in serious crimes. Keanu let the silence stretch. The damage was already done. He had shown the jury that Rhodes was not the honest witness she had claimed to be. And if they looked deeper, they would find even more problems in her past. Judge Malcolm, who had been watching carefully, spoke up. "Miss Rhodes, I suggest you explain these discrepancies immediately. The jury needs to hear your side of the story." Rhodes looked panicked. She fumbled with her notes. I don't know what this is," she stammered. "I didn't authorize those investments. I was just a middleman." Keanu interrupted her, his voice cutting through her weak excuse. "You were more than a middleman, Miss Rhodes. You were directly involved in these transactions. And now we see the full truth." The jury exchanged looks. Some of them shook their heads, others looked disturbed. The prosecution had no response. Their strongest witness was now their biggest weakness. Victoria Graves, the prosecutor, had once been so confident in her case. But now she was struggling to regain control. Keanu sat back down, letting the silence settle. He had done what he needed to do. He had taken the prosecution's key witness and broken her credibility completely. The next morning, as the trial entered its final days, Keanu knew that he had changed the game. The case against him was falling apart. But he also knew that the trial wasn't over yet. And the prosecutor, Victoria Graves, wasn't the type to give up easily. The defense had built its case carefully, using clever legal moves and the shocking financial evidence against Rhodes. But the prosecution wasn't done yet. Graves was a strong opponent, and she wasn't going to let a few lies ruin her case without a fight. As Keanu walked into the courtroom, he could feel the tension in the air. He had come a long way, from simply trying to save himself to fighting for something bigger. Every move he made was about justice now, not just his own freedom. Graves sat at the prosecutor's table, staring at her notes with a fierce focus. She looked like someone who had one last trick up her sleeve. Was she desperate? Or did she actually have something powerful to use against him? Keanu wasn't sure, but he knew one thing: she wouldn't go down without a fight. The judge entered, his usual sarcastic attitude gone. He had seen something rewritable in this trial. And now, everyone was waiting to see how it would end. Victoria Graves stood up with new energy. She had a plan. She called her final witness, a digital forensics expert who could supposedly prove Keanu's involvement in financial crimes. Keanu sat up straighter. This was unexpected. If this expert could actually link him to the illegal transactions, it would be the worst possible outcome. The expert took the stand. His name was Dr. Leonard Vance. He was a highly respected analyst known for his work on big cases. His words carried a lot of weight, and his confidence made him even more convincing. Dr. Vance explained how he had traced financial transactions, uncovering hidden money. His tone was calm and steady, making it all sound simple. But to the jury it seemed undeniable. Then he turned to Keanu. "Mr. Reeves," Dr. Vance said, "I have traced wire transfers from offshore accounts directly linked to your business. These transactions were not simple investments. They were illegal funds hidden through complex digital tricks." A cold shiver ran down Keanu's spine. His heartbeat quickened. The expert's evidence sounded serious, too serious. If this testimony stood unchallenged, it could convince the jury that Keanu was guilty. The courtroom was silent except for Dr. Vance's voice. Even Keanu, who usually stayed calm, felt shaken for a moment. Mercer leaned over and whispered, "Stay calm. We can break this down. It's not as strong as it looks." Keanu nodded, but he could still feel the tight knot in his stomach. He knew one thing for sure: he couldn't afford to make a mistake now. The next move was very important. Judge Malcolm's voice broke the silence. "Mr. Reeves, do you have any questions for the witness?" Keanu stood up. His body was still, but his mind was racing. This was his chance to speak, to fight back. He looked at Dr. Vance and took a deep breath. Then, with a calm voice, he asked, "Dr. Vance, you have shown evidence that makes it look like I did something wrong with money. But I want to ask, how sure are you about your findings? Could there be a mistake?" Dr. Vance didn't move. "I'm very sure. My methods are the best, and no one has ever questioned my work." Keanu didn't stop. He kept pushing. "But is there any chance at all that a mistake was made? Could someone else have changed the records to make it look like I did this?" The room was quiet. Dr. Vance hesitated. It was only for a second, but Keanu noticed it. Finally, Dr. Vance said, "There is always a small chance of error. But in my opinion, it is not likely." Keanu's eyes lit up. "Not likely, but possible?" His voice was strong, making sure the jury was listening. "That means the evidence you showed us is not 100% perfect. If it is not perfect, how can we use it to say I am guilty?" The courtroom was silent. Dr. Vance looked unsure. Keanu had made everyone start to doubt the evidence. The prosecutor, Victoria Graves, looked annoyed. She was trying to stay calm, but Keanu knew he had made an impact. The strong evidence against him now had small cracks. Keanu wasn't finished. He asked another question. "Dr. Vance, you talked about secret bank accounts. How did you get the papers that show these transactions? Did someone give them to you? And did that person want to see me lose this trial?" The question seemed simple, but it was powerful. Keanu was questioning if the evidence was even real. This was the moment he had been waiting for. He wanted to shake the testimony that could send him to jail. Dr. Vance looked nervous. I got the papers through normal steps. But did you check where they came from?" Keanu interrupted. Did you make sure they were real? Or did you just accept them without checking? Dr. Vance couldn't answer. He stammered, looking unsure. Keanu had done it. The expert witness, who was supposed to be so sure, now looked doubtful. The evidence was no longer strong. The prosecutor's big plan had fallen apart. Judge Malcolm called for a short break. The courtroom was buzzing with whispers. Keanu took a deep breath. His heart was beating fast. He had fought against the evidence that seemed too strong to beat. Now all he could do was wait for the jury to decide. Keanu sat down. His lawyer, Mr. Mercer, gave him a nod. "You did it," he whispered. "They won't recover from this." Keanu looked at him. He didn't know if he had won yet, but for the first time he felt hopeful. The trial was almost over. The last day of the trial arrived. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows in the courtroom. Keanu sat at the defense table. His hands were folded in front of him. He didn't move. The jury was still deciding. The whole courtroom was silent, waiting. The prosecution had fought hard. Victoria Graves was a strong lawyer, but Keanu had matched her every step of the way. He used his intelligence, his calm, and his understanding of the law to break down her case piece by piece. The biggest moment was when he showed that Dr. Vance's evidence wasn't perfect. That changed everything. Keanu had taken a big risk by defending himself. He wasn't a real lawyer. He had learned as he went along. But now he wasn't the same person who had started this trial. At first, the judge had laughed at him for defending himself. Now the judge had no choice but to take him seriously. Mr. Mercer sat beside him, flipping through his notes. The older lawyer had been with Keanu throughout the trial, guiding him. But now there was nothing more to say. The jury would decide everything. "Any last thoughts?" Mercer asked without looking up. Keanu shook his head. "I've done all I can. It's up to them now." The last few days had been a blur, questioning witnesses, making legal moves, late-night planning. But now, in this quiet moment, Keanu thought about how much he had changed. He had come into the courtroom as someone people doubted. Now he was a real fighter. "Mr. Reeves." The judge's voice broke through his thoughts. "The jury has reached a verdict." Keanu's heart pounded. He stood up slowly. The whole courtroom was still. The foreperson of the jury, an elderly woman, held a piece of paper. She walked carefully to the judge. Every step felt like it took forever. Keanu could almost hear a clock ticking in his head. The judge took the paper and read it out loud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Keanu Reeves, not guilty on all charges." The words hit Keanu like a wave. For a second he didn't move. Did he hear that right? Not guilty? Then it sunk in. He had done it. He had won. A wave of relief washed over him. The battle was over. The weight on his shoulders was gone. The jury left the room. Keanu turned to Mercer, who was already standing. The older lawyer gave a small nod of approval. He didn't need to say anything. Keanu knew he had earned this victory. Judge Malcolm looked at him. The judge had not been friendly in the beginning. But now he nodded at Keanu, something rare for him. "Mr. Reeves," he said, his voice softer than before. "You surprised me. I did not expect this trial to end this way. But you proved yourself." Keanu smiled. It was a small, tired smile. "Thank you, Your Honor. I'm just happy the truth came out." The courtroom started to empty. Keanu barely had time to think before reporters surrounded him. Cameras flashed and they shouted questions. This was the part he had expected. But his mind was elsewhere. He had won, not just because of luck, but because he had fought hard. He had believed in himself even when others didn't. He had proved that he was more than just a famous person pretending to be a lawyer. He had used his mind, his courage, and his determination to win. That meant everything to him. He had even proved the judge wrong. That small victory made him smile. After escaping the reporters, Keanu found a quiet spot in the courthouse. He leaned against the wall, taking deep breaths. The adrenaline was wearing off. The fear, the worry, it was all gone now. He had made it through the storm. Mercer found him. He held out his hand for a handshake. "You did it, Keanu," he said with a rare smile. "You turned everything around. I'm proud of you." Keanu shook his hand firmly. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mercer. You helped me stay calm." Mercer chuckled. "No, you kept your own head. That's what made the difference. That and your smart thinking." Keanu stepped out of the courthouse. The city outside was busy and full of life. It was so different from the heavy, serious courtroom. The trial was finally behind him. His phone buzzed. A message from his friend Ryan popped up. "You did it, man. Not guilty. Drink on me tonight." Keanu smiled and texted back. "Thanks, Ryan. But not tonight. I need some time to think about everything. As he walked down the street, Keanu felt a quiet happiness. This victory wasn't about fame or attention. It was about proving to himself that he could do it. That no matter how tough things got, if he believed in himself, he could win. He had learned an important lesson: never doubt yourself. Even when the world is against you, you can rise above it. And as the sun set, Keanu knew this victory would stay with him forever. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more exciting stories filled with adventure, mystery, and unforgettable moments. Your support means the world. It keeps these stories coming and the creativity flowing. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to see you in the next video.